Claire often told herself she was lucky. Daniel, her husband of 7 years, had the kind of steady charm that drew people in. A quiet, confident presence that made her feel safe. Their home was filled with laughter most evenings, and to outsiders, their marriage looked like the kind everyone envied. Polished, comfortable, unshakable. But Claire had begun to notice the small things. He lingered longer in the shower. He turned his phone face down on the table. Work dinners stretched late into the night, leaving her curled on the sofa with untouched wine and half-watched shows. Each excuse sounded believable, and yet together, they piled into something heavier. She pushed away the nagging questions because Daniel always returned with that familiar smile. The one that made her feel foolish for doubting him. "You worry too much," he'd say, brushing her hair back like she was fragile glass. And maybe he was right. Marriage required trust, didn't it? To pick apart every inconsistency would make her seem paranoid. Still, lying awake in the dark, she sometimes felt a distance she couldn't explain. Daniel slept soundly beside her, his breathing steady, while her mind replayed unanswered calls and forgotten explanations. She told herself it was stress. She told herself that every couple went through phases. Yet when she rose early to make his coffee, she noticed the faint trace of cologne on his jacket that wasn't his usual brand. When she placed his shirts into the laundry basket, there was a smear of lipstick she hadn't worn in years. They weren't glaring betrayals, not yet. Just shadows too easy to ignore in the daylight. Claire clung to the image of their perfect marriage like a lifeline. She smiled at neighbors, posted cheerful photos, and kissed Daniel at the door. Each morning. To do otherwise would have meant admitting that something precious was slipping through her fingers. But denial is a fragile shelter, and cracks spread quietly, unseen, until the structure gives way. Claire didn't know it yet, but the silence she forced upon herself was planting seeds that would one day grow into something far darker. The first fracture had already formed, and soon it would be impossible to ignore. The lipstick stain had been easy enough to dismiss. She had convinced herself it was a smudge from an office party, a careless hug from a coworker, but the perfume was harder to ignore. It clung faintly to Daniel's collar one evening when he came home late, sharper and sweeter than anything Claire ever owned. When she pressed her face against his jacket, pretending to embrace him, her stomach tightened. "Long night?" she asked lightly, her voice steady though her pulse betrayed her. Daniel smiled, slipping off his tie. "Meetings ran over. You know how it is." He kissed her cheek quickly, too quickly, before heading upstairs. Claire stood in the kitchen, staring at the empty doorway, the scent lingering on her fingertips. That night, as he slept soundly beside her, Claire reached for his phone on the nightstand. The screen lit up with a notification, just a name she didn't recognize and a fragment of a message. "Can't wait to see you again." Her chest constricted. She nearly dropped the phone. The message disappeared as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his lock screen. Claire lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Doubt threaded through her thoughts like poison. She wanted to wake him, shake him, demand answers, but fear held her still. What if she was wrong? What if this was all some elaborate misunderstanding she had invented out of loneliness? The fear of appearing hysterical was worse than the fear of truth. In the morning, she forced a smile as she handed him his coffee. Her hands trembled slightly, and Daniel noticed. "You okay?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. "Fine," she replied too quickly, retreating behind a wall of composure. He kissed her forehead and left for work, leaving Claire alone with the echo of that unread message. She told herself she wouldn't check again. But as the hours passed, the temptation grew unbearable. She replayed his every word from the past few weeks, each one now sounding like a careful construction. The image of their perfect marriage had begun to fracture, and with each crack, her unease deepened. By evening, Claire's suspicions had hardened into something sharper. She lingered by the laundry basket, her fingers grazing the cuff of his shirt, searching for evidence that might not exist. The house felt different now. Every sound amplified, every silence too heavy. The perfume, the message, the lies she told herself to stay calm. They were no longer whispers of paranoia. They were signs, warnings she could no longer bury. And soon, those warnings would lead her to discover the shadow of another woman. Claire told herself she wouldn't do it again. She wasn't the kind of wife who spied, who rifled through private messages like a desperate stranger. But the thought of that half-seen text had burned into her mind, replaying in sleepless hours until the need for certainty outweighed her guilt. So one night, after Daniel slipped into the shower, she reached for his phone. Her fingers trembled. As she typed in his passcode, the numbers etched into her memory from years of casual glances. The screen unlocked with an ease that felt both shameful and liberating. At first, there was nothing. Work emails, news alerts, group chats with colleagues. She nearly convinced herself she had been wrong, until a thread marked only by a single initial caught her attention. She tapped it, heart pounding, and the screen filled with words that shattered her. Last night was perfect. I can still taste your lips. When can we meet again? Don't keep me waiting too long, handsome. Claire's breath hitched. The room seemed to tilt, the glow of the screen blinding. She scrolled further, each message a blade cutting into her chest. Pictures followed, blurred selfies of a woman smiling, a glimpse of bare skin against sheets Claire didn't recognize. Flirtatious emojis, hearts, secret promises exchanged in stolen hours. Her entire body shook. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't her imagination. It was real, undeniable, damning. She wanted to scream, to storm into the bathroom and demand answers, while soap still clung to his skin. But instead, she snapped the phone shut and placed it carefully back on the nightstand, as though the device itself might betray her. When Daniel stepped out minutes later, steam curling around him, Claire was already beneath the covers, her face turned away. He kissed her hair absently before sliding in beside her. She lay rigid, her heartbeat a hammer in her ears. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she forced them down. Confrontation would give him power. He would twist it, lie, make her doubt herself again. Not this time. This time she would be quiet, calculating. If he thought she was blind, then perhaps she could learn more. Perhaps she could uncover every detail of his betrayal before she struck back. The thought both terrified and steadied her. Rage and heartbreak mingled in her veins, but beneath them ran a colder current. Determination. She wouldn't let him reduce her to a hysterical wife clinging to suspicion. She would gather proof, piece by piece, until the truth stood undeniable, Laius. Daniel's breathing slowed into sleep. Claire stared into the darkness, her eyes burning. The image of the woman's smile seared itself into her mind, and with it, a question she could no longer silence. Who was she? The silence between them thickened, heavier than ever. Claire knew that hiding her knowledge would be dangerous, but it was the only way forward. And with each passing day, Daniel's mask would begin to slip, revealing the cracks she was now determined to expose. The name had lingered at the edge of Claire's thoughts since the night she read those messages. At first, it was just an initial, meaningless and taunting. But after careful searching, subtle cross-references and watching Daniel's patterns, she uncovered the truth. The woman was Evelyn, a younger colleague he had once mentioned in passing years ago, when she had been nothing more than the new assistant. Now she was something else entirely. Claire's chest burned as she pieced the fragments together. The photos, the hours he disappeared, the perfume that never belonged to her. Evelyn was not just anyone. She was younger, striking, full of the kind of careless energy Claire feared she had lost. A ghost from Daniel's past, reborn into the heart of her present. Claire's decision to follow him came quietly, almost naturally. She told herself it wasn't madness, it was necessity. If she wanted truth, she would have to see it with her own eyes. So, one cold evening, when Daniel left claiming he had a late meeting, Claire waited a few minutes before grabbing her coat and slipping into her car. She tailed him at a cautious distance, every turn tightening the knot in her stomach. He stopped at a dimly lit restaurant on the far side of town. Claire parked across the street, hands trembling on the steering wheel, and watched. Her breath caught when Evelyn appeared, her figure elegant in a simple dress. Daniel's face lit up as he greeted her, a warmth Claire hadn't seen directed at herself in months. They sat close, laughing, leaning into each other as if no one else existed. Claire felt invisible, exiled from the life she thought she owned. She wanted to burst through the glass to demand how he could betray her so easily, but the weight of humiliation held her frozen. Hours passed in agonizing slowness. When they finally left, Daniel brushed Evelyn's hair back, kissed her cheek, and led her to his car. Their closeness was undeniable, intimate in a way that shattered any lingering doubt. Claire dug her nails into her palm until she nearly bled. Forcing herself not to cry out, she followed them again, this time to a quiet apartment complex. When Daniel disappeared inside with Evelyn, the last of Claire's hope crumbled. Her marriage, her trust, her future, all of it felt stolen by the woman in the shadows, yet she did not confront him. Not then. She sat in her car, shaking, whispering to herself that she needed to be careful. She needed to know more. A single confrontation would not be enough. Daniel would twist the truth like he always did. So she waited, hidden, silent, her mind already unraveling plans she couldn't fully name. The truth was no longer a question. It was a weapon she would learn to wield. And when Daniel returned home that night, smiling as though nothing had happened, Claire greeted him with a steady voice and a quiet nod, concealing the storm that was beginning to form inside her. When Daniel returned from Evelyn's apartment that night, he walked through the door with the same polished ease as always. A smile, a gentle kiss on Claire's cheek, a casual question about dinner. To anyone else, it would have seemed like the perfect image of a husband coming home to his wife. But to Claire, his gestures now felt like cruel performances, rehearsed lies wrapped in tenderness. She played along, forcing her lips to curl into a smile, her hands steady as she set the table. Inside, however, her chest was tight, her throat raw from silent screams. Each clang of silverware, each step across the kitchen floor sounded louder than it should have, as though the house itself were mocking her restraint. Over the next few days, she tried to slip questions into their conversations. Casual at first. How late will you be tonight? Who did you have lunch with? Daniel's answers were smooth, almost too smooth, his tone just light enough to make her feel unreasonable for asking. You don't trust me anymore? He asked one evening, his voice tinged with disappointment rather than anger. Claire, you've been imagining things. You know how stressed I've been at work. Her heart sank at his calmness. He wasn't defensive, he was dismissive. He looked at her the way one might look at a restless child, someone who needed comfort rather than truth. When she pressed further, Daniel chuckled softly, shaking his head. You're tired. You need rest. Don't let your thoughts run away with you. Gaslighting. She could feel it happening, each word bending reality just enough to make her doubt herself. Had she really seen what she saw? Was the perfume a coincidence? Were the messages just misinterpreted? The questions swirled, colliding with the images of Daniel and Evelyn laughing together at the restaurant. Claire clung to her routines, desperate for control. She made breakfast every morning, folded his shirts neatly, kept the house immaculate. To Daniel, it likely looked like devotion. In truth, it was her armor, the only thing holding her together. But at night, lying beside him, her mask would falter. She stared at the ceiling, listening to his steady breathing, wondering how many lies rested on his tongue. The silence between them stretched wider, each day another step away from the man she thought she knew. Still, she said nothing. She swallowed her fury, her heartbreak, even her sanity, choosing silence as her shield. Because if she erupted too, soon he would twist it all back onto her. For now, she would let him believe she was fooled. For now, she would keep her pain hidden, festering in the shadows. But silence cannot last forever. And soon, her restraint would give way to something far more dangerous. The house was too quiet that night. Claire sat at the kitchen table long, after dinner, the clock ticking like a hammer in her ears. Daniel scrolled casually on his phone across from her, the glow of the screen illuminating his calm, unreadable face. Every click, Every breath felt like an insult. Finally, the words slipped out. "You've been different lately." Daniel looked up, eyebrows lifting in mild surprise. "Different? How so?" His tone was light, but Claire caught the flicker in his eyes, a calculation behind the calm. "You come home late. You're distracted. Sometimes I feel like I don't even know where you've been." Her voice wavered between accusation and plea. Daniel set his phone aside, leaning back in his chair. "Claire, we've been through this. Work has been demanding. I can't help the hours." Her throat tightened. "And the perfume? The messages on your phone?" His expression hardened for a moment, then softened into something almost pitying. "Claire," he said gently, "you're imagining things again. Do you hear yourself? You're chasing shadows." The heat rose in her chest. "I'm not imagining anything. I saw—" She stopped herself before she revealed too much, but the damage was done. Daniel seized on her hesitation, his voice low and steady. "You've been so stressed. Ever since my late nights started, you've been spinning these stories in your head. This isn't you. You're not well." The words hit harder than any denial. Not well. As if her pain, her doubts, were symptoms of illness rather than reality. He was twisting the truth so effortlessly, making her question her own sanity. Tears stung her eyes, anger and despair colliding. "Don't make me feel crazy, Daniel. Don't do that to me." He sighed, walking around the table to place his hands on her shoulders. His touch was gentle, soothing, but it felt like a cage. "I love you. You're my wife. Nothing else matters. Stop letting paranoia ruin what we have." She wanted to scream, to tear his hands away, but she froze beneath the weight of his words. For a moment, she almost believed him, almost convinced herself that her mind had betrayed her. Almost. But as he kissed her temple and whispered reassurances, her gaze drifted to his phone left on the table, screen dark, secrets locked inside. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unspoken. Claire knew she was at her breaking point. His lies, his gaslighting, were pushing her toward a place she had never dared to go. And the closer she came to shattering, the more dangerous she felt herself becoming. Sleep no longer came easily. Claire lay awake most nights listening to Daniel's steady breathing, her own mind running through fragments of conversations, flashes of perfume, and the haunting image of Evelyn's smile. The ache of betrayal had hardened into something colder, sharper. If Daniel insisted on masking the truth, then she would unmask him herself. The next morning, she made her decision. She drove across town to a small electronics store, her palms clammy as she purchased a pocket-sized voice recorder and a discreet camera no larger than her palm. The clerk barely looked at her, yet Claire felt exposed, as though everyone in the store could see the storm inside her. Back home, she hid the devices carefully. The recorder slipped easily into Daniel's jacket pocket one evening, her hands trembling as she adjusted the fabric to conceal it. Later, she placed the camera in the study, angled just enough to capture his desk where his phone often lay. Each act filled her with dread and exhilaration, the line between justice and obsession blurring. Daniel noticed her watchfulness, but he mistook it for longing. "You've been quiet lately," he said one night, brushing his hand across hers. Claire forced a smile, her lips stiff. If only he knew the truth, that every word he spoke, every call he answered might now belong to her. The first recordings were uneventful, full of ordinary phone calls and muttered frustrations about work. But Claire persisted, listening late into the night with headphones pressed to her ears, waiting for the moment when his facade cracked. Each click of the recorder felt like progress, each empty file another layer of suspense. Her notebooks filled with observations, times he left, numbers he dialed, excuses he repeated. The act of documenting steadied her, transforming grief into purpose. She was no longer the helpless wife begging for answers. She was an investigator, her own silent detective building a case against the man she once trusted most. Yet beneath her newfound control simmered something darker. As she scribbled notes in the dim glow of the lamp, her handwriting grew jagged, frantic. Sometimes she laughed quietly to herself at the absurdity of it all, then moments later pressed her hands to her face, sobbing into the darkness. The duality frightened her, the fragile woman shattered by betrayal and the cold, calculating version rising in her place. But she clung to the plan, convincing herself that truth required sacrifice, and in her heart, she knew the recordings and evidence were only the beginning. If Daniel pushed her any further, she would need more than proof. She would need retribution. The living room was dim except for the glow of a single lamp. Claire had arranged it that way deliberately, the shadows thick enough to make Daniel uneasy when he walked in. She sat on the sofa with her notebook in her lap, the recorder in her pocket, and a folder of printed texts and photographs spread neatly across the coffee table. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady. Tonight, she would no longer play, the silent, obedient wife. When Daniel entered, loosening his tie, he paused. "Why are you sitting in the dark?" Claire lifted her gaze, calm but sharp. "Waiting for you." He frowned, half amused, half wary. "Well, here I am." She gestured to the table. "Then maybe you'd like to explain this." Daniel's eyes flicked to the pages, screenshots of his texts with Evelyn, receipts for dinners, even a blurred still from the hidden camera. His composure cracked for the first time, his jaw tightening as he sank into the armchair opposite. Where did you get this?" His voice was low, dangerous. "Does it matter?" Claire shot back. "You lied for months. You made me feel insane while you were sneaking around with her." Daniel exhaled, leaning back. To her astonishment, he smiled faintly. "Claire, you've gone too far. Snooping, spying, this isn't healthy. Don't you dare turn this on me." Her voice rose, trembling with fury. "You gaslit me, made me doubt myself while you were sleeping with her." The silence that followed was suffocating. Finally, Daniel spoke, his tone stripped of charm. "Fine. Yes. I've been with Evelyn. But you don't understand. She isn't just some fling. She's important to me." Claire froze, her breath catching. "Important? She's a child compared to you." Daniel's expression hardened. "She listens. She believes in me. She doesn't pick me apart or question every step I take. She makes me feel alive, Claire. Something you stopped doing years ago." The words cut deeper than any blade. Claire staggered back, her chest heaving. "So it's my fault? I drove you to this? You don't see it, do you?" Daniel's voice sharpened. "Evelyn knows me better than you ever did." The mention of Evelyn again, not as a secret but as a rival, shattered Claire's restraint. Her hands shook, rage and humiliation surging into something uncontrollable. "You brought her into our marriage, into my life. Do you know what that's done to me?" Daniel stood abruptly, towering over her. "Enough. This is over. You've lost yourself, Claire. I can't do this anymore." Tears blurred her vision, but beneath the heartbreak burned something darker. His confession, his dismissal, his betrayal laid bare. It left no room for repair. She realized then that this wasn't just about lies. It was about erasure, about being replaced, discarded, made invisible in her own home. And as Daniel turned away, as though the conversation were finished, Claire felt something inside her fracture beyond repair. The night was not finished. Not yet. Daniel's back was turned when it happened. His dismissal, the final casual turn of his body as though her world was nothing but a nuisance, ignited something uncontrollable inside Claire. Years of trust, months of suspicion, hours of humiliation condensed into one unbearable instant. Her eyes darted to the fireplace mantel where the heavy iron poker rested. She didn't think, not really. Her body moved faster than reason, faster than morality. One moment her hands were trembling at her sides, and the next they were wrapped around the cold steel. "Don't walk away from me," she whispered, her voice barely audible, trembling with fury and heartbreak. Daniel paused, but he didn't turn. "Go to bed, Claire, you need help." The words tore through her, final and merciless. With a raw, guttural cry, she swung. The poker connected with a sickening thud. Daniel stumbled, his hand flying to the back of his head, eyes wide with shock. "Claire," he gasped. But before the sound of his voice could soften her, she struck again. This time harder, fueled by years of swallowed silence. The room erupted in chaos. A lamp crashing to the floor, glass shattering, furniture scraping as Daniel tried to fend her off. His protests were desperate, disbelieving, but Claire was beyond hearing. She saw not her husband, but the man who had erased her, replaced her, made her question her very sanity. And then, silence. Daniel collapsed onto the rug, blood pooling beneath his head in a dark, spreading stain. The poker clattered from Claire's hands, echoing like a death knell. She staggered back, her chest heaving, the room tilting around her. Her breath came in sharp gasps, then slowed into a hollow rhythm. The only sound was the faint drip of blood onto the hardwood, steady and relentless. She pressed her trembling hands to her face, smearing crimson across her skin. The rage that had consumed her dissolved into something colder, shock, disbelief, a void where fury once burned. She had done it, the unthinkable, the irreversible. Claire dropped to her knees beside him, shaking. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice fractured. She touched his face, pale and motionless, as though some fragile gesture might call him back. But there was no answer. His eyes, once so piercing, stared past her into nothingness. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she did not cry aloud. Her grief was muted, strangled by the enormity of what she had done. She sat in the silence, surrounded by shards of glass, the coppery scent of blood thick in the air. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Time had lost its shape. And then, slowly, the weight of reality pressed down on her. This was not just betrayal anymore. This was a crime, a secret she could never undo. Claire's breath quickened again. The silence that filled the room was not peace. It was the prelude to consequences. And, somewhere in that silence, she realized the real nightmare was only beginning. The silence after Daniel's last breath was unbearable. Claire sat frozen on the floor, her hands sticky with blood, her heart thundering so violently it seemed it might rip from her chest. The house, once filled with familiar warmth, now felt alien, a crime scene, a tomb. Her gaze fixed on Daniel's body. The crimson pool beneath him crept wider, staining the rug, seeping into the cracks of the hardwood. She wanted to scream, but the sound caught in her throat, strangled by terror. There was no undoing what she had done. Panic surged. "You have to act. Now." Her body moved on instinct. She dragged the rug across the floor, clumsy and desperate, pulling Daniel's body onto it with a strength she didn't know she had. Every scrape echoed like a confession. She wiped at the blood with trembling hands, only smearing it further. The metallic scent filled her lungs, choking her with every breath. In the kitchen, she grabbed a bucket, rags, bleach. She worked furiously, scrubbing the floor until her arms ached, until her knuckles bled. But no matter how much she cleaned, faint stains remained, tiny reminders of the violence that had erupted in her home. When she glanced at the clock, hours had passed. It was nearly dawn. Her mind raced. What will you say? How will you explain? This? She rehearsed lies in her head, each one faltering under the weight of truth. An accident, a break-in, self-defense. None of them sounded convincing, even to herself. By the time she collapsed into a chair, her body trembling, the first light of morning crept through the blinds. Daniel's phone buzzed on the table, a message from Evelyn. Claire's stomach lurched. She didn't open it, but the sight of his mistress's name on the screen sent a fresh wave of rage and despair through her. Her reflection in the darkened window startled her. Pale, hollow eyes stared back, smeared with blood and sweat. She barely recognized the woman gazing at her. She had crossed a line, one that could never be retraced, and yet, beneath the terror, a strange calm settled in. She had survived the night. She had taken control, but guilt crept in too, curling around her ribs, whispering that someone would see through her lies. Every sound outside, a car door, a dog's bark, the faint hum of neighbors beginning their day, felt like a threat. Paranoia tightened its grip, her pulse quickening at shadows in the corners. Claire pressed her hands together, trying to steady herself. But deep down, she knew the cover-up wouldn't hold. It was only a matter of time before the knock came at her door. The knock came sooner than Claire had expected. It was sharp, unyielding, the kind that carried authority. When she opened the door, 2 detectives stood on her porch, their faces grave beneath the morning sun. "Mrs. Whitmore?" one asked. She nodded, her throat dry. "We'd like to ask you a few questions." From that moment, the walls of her carefully constructed lies began to collapse. At first, she tried to hold to her rehearsed story, that Daniel hadn't come home, that she'd fallen asleep waiting for him. But the detective's eyes were steady, unblinking. They noticed the faint trace of bleach in the air, the scratches on the floor where the rug had dragged. One detail at a time, the truth leaked through the cracks. By evening, word had spread. Friends called, family arrived, neighbors whispered. The perfect marriage they had admired for years was gone, dismantled in a single day of police tape and flashing lights. Claire sat in her own living room, now crowded with investigators, her wrists cuffed, her dignity stripped. The questioning was relentless. Photos of Daniel's body, screenshots of messages with Evelyn, evidence she had once gathered to prove his betrayal now turned against her, painting a portrait not of a victim, but of a woman consumed by rage. When Evelyn was brought in for questioning, Claire's chest hollowed out. She watched from across the room as the young woman wept, claiming she hadn't known the depth of Daniel's lies, that she never meant to ruin a marriage. Claire wanted to scream at her, to remind everyone of the laughter, the intimacy, the betrayal she had witnessed with her own eyes, but no one listened. The mistress was treated like another casualty of Daniel's choices. Claire was the monster. Her parents refused to meet her eyes. Old friends shook their heads, pity-twisting, into judgment. The secrets of her marriage, the gaslighting, the manipulation, the affair, became headlines for others to dissect, stripped of nuance, stripped of pain. And through it all, Claire realized the terrible irony. She had wanted truth. Proof. Justice for the years of deception that had hollowed her out, and she had found it. But the truth did not free her. It destroyed her. Sitting in the interrogation room, her reflection warped in the one-way glass, she felt the weight of it settle. The justice she thought she wanted had cost her everything. Her husband, her freedom, her future. All that remained was the shadow of her crime, stretching long and cold across the ruins of her life. The courtroom was silent, except for the shuffle of papers and the echo of the judge's gavel. Claire stood rigid, her wrists cuffed, her gaze fixed on the floor as though looking at anyone might shatter her fragile composure. She had imagined this moment in countless ways, sometimes pleading, sometimes raging, sometimes breaking down entirely. But when it finally arrived, she felt nothing. Just an emptiness that stretched deeper than grief. The prosecutor spoke with sharp precision, outlining every detail, the affair, the surveillance, the recordings, the night of violence. Each fact, each photo projected for the jury, carved away at her humanity until she was no longer Claire Whitmore, wife and neighbor, but the accused. A woman defined only by the crime she had committed. When her attorney rose to speak, he painted her as a victim of betrayal, a woman pushed beyond her limits by a husband's manipulation and cruelty. He spoke of Daniel's lies, his mistress, the years of gaslighting, but his words sounded hollow to her own ears. Nothing he said could undo what she had done. Nothing could wash the blood from her hands. She searched the courtroom for familiar faces. Her parents sat rigid, their expressions blank masks of shame. Old friends who once envied her marriage avoided her gaze, whispering behind clasped hands. And then there was Evelyn, seated in the gallery, her face streaked with tears. Claire's stomach twisted at the sight of her. The woman who had stolen Daniel yet now wept as though she were the widow. The irony was unbearable. When the verdict came, the words felt both inevitable and distant. Guilty. The syllables echoed in her, mind hollow and final. The judge's voice followed, cold and steady. Years behind bars, stripped of freedom, stripped of identity. As the guards led her away, Claire's mind drifted. She thought of her wedding day, the sunlight spilling through the church windows, Daniel's hand warm in hers, the vows whispered with trembling smiles. She had believed in forever. She had believed in love. But love had betrayed her. Love had gaslit her, abandoned her, replaced her with someone younger and prettier. And in the end, love had consumed her, twisting into rage until it left nothing but violence and ruin. In her cell that night, Claire lay on the thin mattress staring at the ceiling. The silence pressed in around her, but it was no longer unbearable. It was fitting. She had wanted the truth. She had demanded it, hunted it, bled for it. And the truth had cost her everything. Justice, they called it. But justice felt no different from damnation. Closing her eyes, she whispered into the emptiness, not sure if it was to Daniel, to herself, or to the love that had destroyed them both. This is how it ends. And in that final thought, she understood. The end of love was not quiet, not merciful. It was blood on the floor, iron in her hands, and the echo of a life she could never reclaim.